This is Inconstant.
Hello everyone, it's The Head. This is another episode of Inconstant. I'm talking to Geoffrey Sautner about Andrei Tarkovsky's sci-fi film Stalker. There are a few audio issues in this episode. Apologise for that. We'll try and sort those out in future episodes. Hope you enjoyed the chat. Thanks. Bye. Okay, hello everyone. This is an episode of Inconstant. We're continuing our series of episodes talking about films. Today, my guest is Geoffrey Sautner. Geoffrey's a BJJ brown belt and filmmaker. He's originally from Canada, has lived in London since 2003. He worked in the operations charity for about 15 years. Geoffrey's pursued BJJ and filmmaking as a passion, eventually leaving the office environment to pursue BJJ full-time in 2018. I'll include a link to Geoffrey's filmmaking stuff in the description for the episode. Geoffrey enjoys his films typically to be... In short, Geoffrey films typically feature non-narrative storytelling in the framework of art and experimental filmmaking. Okay, Geoffrey, do you want to say hello to everyone? My listeners,
yeah, hi.
5 of them.
Hi, yeah, really, I'm very grateful that you've offered me this opportunity. I take every opportunity I can to talk about films. It's one of my favorite subjects, so this is really good.
Yeah, so the film that we are going to be talking about today is Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker. It's a Russian language film that's been described as a sci-fi movie. I'm not too sure if I agree with that description, but we'll get into that later. So this is an in-joke between me and one of my friends. So this is a question I'm going to be asking a lot of all my guests from here on in. What is your favorite episode of Time Team?
Sorry, what is my favorite episode of
Time Team? Your favorite episode of Time Team? This is a joke only two people are going to get.
I don't know what it is. Sorry, I don't know what Time Team
Okay,
is.
that's absolutely fine.
Is it a fiction TV show?
No,
is it a reality TV? What is it?
It's a British archaeological TV show where a group of archaeologists go into the British countryside and dig up a piece of the land to find pieces of pottery and that sort of thing.
I do know the show, but I've never seen it, so I'm sorry. I can't have an opinion on it.
That is a joke for exactly 3 people. That's fine. Okay, so let's get into the movie. So, when was the first time you saw the film?
Oh, it's a good question. It would have been maybe either late teens or early 20s. Say around the age of 20 is when I first saw it.
And did you go to see it in the cinema, or was it a VHS rental? Kind of how did the do you remember how it came into kind of like your?
I like how you know how old I am by the fact that you said that if I saw it when I was 20, it was either a VHS rental or it was in the cinema. It was a VHS. It was definitely at home. I watched it at home.
Okay, and when was the last time you saw the film?
Oh, like yesterday. I watched it again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was my first time. I hadn't. I've come across the name Tarkovsky because I've heard about the movie Solaris. I've not seen any of the other movies apart from this. So the other obvious question I'll kind of want to ask is, why did you kind of choose this movie to discuss on the podcast?
I had thought about a couple of movies to choose from, but I chose this one because it is a science fiction movie, and despite what you say, it is a science fiction movie.
Yeah.
But I think also because it deals with a lot of themes that are resonant with what we're dealing with right now. In the modern world, in the post-COVID, in the mid-COVID world, there are some themes that are resonant in this movie. And that's really why I chose it. I thought I might choose something that was a little bit less difficult, something perhaps that was more entertaining. But in the end, this is one of my favorite movies, and I know you are a movie buff, Fed. You're definitely somebody who has got a lot of language and to be able to deal with movies, and I knew that it would be more rewarding for the both of us if we discussed something that was a challenging film rather than something a little easier.
Yeah, so that's absolutely correct. I did find it a kind of challenging watch. I kind of watched this in 3 batches. So I watched it for, I think, kind of like in half an hour, 45-minute slots. It's a movie that, so for those of you who aren't aware kind of about the language of filmmaking, next time you go to watch a movie, clap your hands every time they change a shot. Mm-hmm. And you'll find yourself clapping your hands quite often. That's not really the case with Stalker. The camera holds on whatever it's filming for a very, very long time. And that can be, as a viewer, if you're not used to that sort of pace of shot selection and shot holding, quite into. And I think it probably says something about the movies that I've been kind of watching recently, that I found it quite difficult to hold my attention. And there's just kind of like, and there's a lot of shots in the movie that are quite anxiety filling, I think is kind of the word. And it's just got, all right, I need to take a break from this and kind of reset and then come back at it again. So I don't know what you think about that.
You're 100% right. Even somebody like me who I absolutely adore movies like Stalker that are slow paced, like each scene, each shot will take sometimes well over a minute. And in fact, I think it averages out for the whole movie to be each shot being just about a minute long, which is an eternity in filmmaking, in the context of filmmaking, where in modern filmmaking especially, there can be literally more than 60 shots in a minute because of great shots, and especially if it's an action movie or something like that. So and so even me, a person who loves this type of movie, I get that kind of itchy hand feeling where you're watching these very long edits. And when I say itchy hand, what I mean is like you want to reach and grab something. You want to grab your phone, or you want to, like look at something else on your computer, open a new tab on a browser, but you have to resist that. And I think this movie really rewards you when you resist it, because it forces you to really consider what is being said, what is being shown, so much so that I think once you do abandon that itchy hand feeling, you can start to really dig deep into the images that you're seeing, and it does cause anxiety. You're 100% right. In the same sense that if you're having a conversation with another person and they're looking at you and they're staring at you, that causes you anxiety. You're wondering, why am I, what is this person doing? Why are they staring at me? Is there something on my face? Am I, and I think this movie looks at you, it gazes at you, and it's uncomfortable. And even though there's no blood in the movie, well, there's no real blood in the movie, there's no violence to speak of. And yet it feels like more of an anxiety-producing film than almost all horror movies I've ever watched. And so, yeah, totally take what you're saying. You're 100% right. I agree with it.
So, do you want to kind of walk the listeners through the basic of what Stalker is about? Please kind of describe what the story is and kind of what happens.
Yeah.
Spoilers here on out, guys. Spoilers here on out. So
I don't know that I want to give. Definitely, I'll describe to you what the movie is about. but I don't want to say too much about the characters because I do want your listeners to watch the movie. And I think that when it comes down to it, this is an examination of character and of people. And so I don't want to give too much away on what I think about the people, but I will set the stage. And so here's the story in a nutshell. It's it's never expressly said where it is, but one can assume it's in like a sort of Soviet state, not in the Soviet Union itself, but in one of the sort of satellite states where there is definitely what you could say a police state. And in the recent past, a meteor, or it is said that a meteor has struck the Earth and left in its place something called the Zone. And the zone is an area that has been, cordoned off by the state, and nobody is allowed in or out. Not that there's anybody in there anyway, but definitely nobody's allowed in. And in the zone, it is said there is a place called the Room, and the Room is an area that will grant your innermost desire if you visit it. Visiting it is very difficult, perilous, and lots of people try and fail and never come back. But in particular, there's one character, and actually another interesting bit here is that none of the characters in the movie have names. They all are addressed only by their archetype. So there's the writer, there is the scientist, the professor they call him, and then importantly, the named lead character, the Stalker. And the Stalker has a particular power to be able to bring people to the Room by virtue of some kind of an inner power that allows him to avoid the traps and the various bits along the way that would kill or disappear people who are searching for the Room. That's it, and it's 3 hours of this. That's 3 hours of 3 people searching for the Room in order to achieve ostensibly their innermost desire.
So the quite an of color you saw here with his family, and you only describe as a piss-filled filter to color it's kind of like, it looks like urine.
Yeah, it's sepia.
To me, the way they kind of like colored sepia, kind of like a very strange choice to kind of use as a filter. And kind of when they enter the zone, then it comes colorful, kind of like the difference between the Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy's in the real world as opposed to when she's in Oz, and it comes this beautiful, vibrant, sort of like vibrant world. So I was just wondering why your maker chose to do that, and what you think that says about the value between the world that they're actually, the so-called real world, as to the kind of value that the characters ascribe to the zone.
Yeah, it's a good question and an interesting directorial choice. Tarkovsky is definitely a filmmaker's filmmaker. What I mean by that is he spends a lot of time thinking about the way the film looks and what is portrayed on the screen and what it says about the people making the movie. Now, I can't know exactly what Tarkovsky was thinking about this, but I can say that sepia is traditionally a much more like an older. It gives the quality of the film looking older. Sepia, if a sepia tint on a photograph will make it look like almost like an oldie timey, like an old west kind of thing, right? And that transition from sepia tint to color, I take it, my opinion is that it shows that the people involved, and especially the stalker, is only ever really feeling alive when they are in the process of searching out something difficult. So while they're being challenged, the challenge in this case being finding the room in the zone, which is very difficult, it are those moments in which they are feeling the most alive, and everything else is just that kind of sepia tint, that not quite vibrant, dull existence. And I think it goes a long way to talk about, you and I both do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's how we know each other. And it's a very difficult endeavor. It's full of injury and difficulties. Sometimes you might be doing it for like a week or a month, and you're not doing it well. You're struggling. It's difficult. But in the end, without that struggle, the rest of your life would be a bit boring. It would be sepia. I think that's why he chose it to be that way. I don't know that there's anything more complicated than that, but it does. It is an interesting question. Why do you think he chose that? What's your opinion on
it? I think there's a couple of reasons I think he chose that. I think the first reason is to do with kind of the internal struggle that the stalker character is kind of going through. His life outside the zone to be poverty stricken. His where he's living, he's got one bed that he has to share with his wife and his child. They don't have any furniture, so it kind of to kind of emphasize that where the stalker is at the moment is quite a difficult place. And then when you hit the color of the zone, that one of the first things he does is kind of like hug the ground and kind of embrace sort of like the I think that there's a question about whether it's in a strange sort of way an environmental film. Kind of like a lot of the sepia scenes are in industrialized areas, and almost all the color scenes are in more fields or where it's nature's reclaimed the land or the buildings. Maybe there's something about that in there as well.
No, it's a very good point. And actually, this is something I completely hadn't thought of, but you've pointed it out. The stalker spends a lot of the movie lying down or embracing the earth in some fashion. Yeah. In fact, there are whole sections of the film where he is talking and lying down in the middle of a river or face down on some land. And it's almost like he's going over with that desire to connect with the physical nature of the world. It's a very good point. I think it's especially interesting because the film is very richly endowed with beautiful scenery. It's not really beautiful actually, but interesting, rich scenery. Yeah. And yet, fundamentally, the theme of the picture is about an internal struggle. The internal struggles of the characters. The whole thing is an examination of each character's internal struggle with the idea of achieving their innermost desire. And it's delivered to you. The vehicle in which it's delivered to you is this richly, this rich tapestry of images of being outside and the verdant green and the dilapidated buildings and destroyed tanks and all of this. And so there's such a strange relationship with choosing to film very interesting, rich locations, but having the theme of the film be fundamentally about the internal struggle of each character.
Yeah. So I it's kind of like a side point. I recently recorded another podcast with someone, and we were reviewing this book called Springtime in Chernobyl. And it's funny that I've seen, or I'm talking about two pieces of art where obviously Chernobyl, huge nuclear accident, and that's created a zone where people can't inhabit, and essentially what the artists went there for. In Springtime in Chernobyl, the artists went there to create a piece of art that kind of exposed the poverty and the struggle of the people that live in that, who still live in the exclusion zone. And what he ended up coming away with was an appreciation of the beauty of the area. So this, it's a dangerous place, Chernobyl's kind of, radiation levels, and if you step it out, there's certain spots that are safe, and then the spot next to it that's dangerous. And it reminded me a lot of what was happening in Stalker. There'll be, he does this thing where he throws a nut to make sure that the area is safe, and there's that some areas are going to be dangerous, and there's some spots that are going to be safe. So I'm just wondering, obviously, Tarkovsky's a Russian filmmaker, if that experience of what was happening in Chernobyl affected some of the decisions that he made in regards to nature reclaiming land that had been kind of either despoiled by either man or an outside alien force.
Yeah, Chernobyl was 1986, and I'm certain that that it was made before that. Stalker was made before that.
Okay.
I have that here, so I can tell you right now when it was made, if you bear with me. 79. Yeah, so we're talking like around 6 years before Chernobyl. But you're 100% right. It feels like he's talking about Chernobyl. In fact, you could almost be forgiven for thinking it's a movie about Chernobyl in that way. I really like the fact that this process that the Stalker goes through, which appears on the surface to have some kind of internal logic to the Stalker, of taking this like a nut from a nut and bolt and tying a piece of fabric to it, and then throwing it, and examining the throw, and then walking towards it to see if it's safe. It's a ritual that he does to find the safe path to the room, and yet it's never really explained why he does it. Why does he do it? What is the logic behind it? There's no discussion on even if it works. Does it work? Is it really unsafe? You don't really know. There's only one moment in the movie where one of the characters, not the Stalker, I think it's the writer, decides he sees the room in the distance, and they've been walking for a while, and he says, I'm just going to walk up to the room. And the Stalker says, don't do that. It's dangerous. If you walk straight towards the room, you will die. And the writer says, this is silly. I'm just going to do it. And he starts walking towards the room. And then all of a sudden he just stops. And he turns, he's maybe gone about 100 meters, and he stops, and he turns around, and he looks back at the two others who are standing there watching him go. And then he turns around and he walks back, and he says, well, why did you call me back? The writer says to the Stalker and to the professor. And the Stalker says, I didn't say anything to you. I didn't tell you to come back. And so it's never expressly said, but there's some, with this kind of ritualistic nut throwing and the fact that they're following him, and they just believe that he says that, I know the safe way through. There's a real, almost of a quasi-spiritual element to this, that there's a and beyond the fact there's a lot of Christian imagery in this, that's it's Christian, but it's also not. I think there's this undercurrent of mysticism in the film that you kind of have to accept, and once you accept it, you accept the internal logic of the film being consistent, which it really is. It treats itself as a very consistent film, even though for us, the watcher, it looks very illogical. And I think, so in a way, I guess what the filmmaker is saying is, if there is a place where the laws of physics, the laws of reality as we know it, are suspended, which Chernobyl kind of is to an extent, right? Like if you were to walk into the zone, in the exclusion zone in Chernobyl, you would notice that everything's overgrown. It definitely looks strange, but you wouldn't feel the danger, right? You would see that things are overgrown, and you would see the rusted cars and everything, but you don't have a sense of the danger. People tell you that there is radioactive material everywhere. They tell you that it's dangerous if you were to do this or do that. You have a Geiger counter which is reading high radiation levels in some areas and not others. but you don't have a sense of it. Your eyes, your smell, all of these, you can't sense the danger. And so in a way, you have to trust the Geiger counter. You have to trust the scientists who are saying it's dangerous and saying go here and don't go there. And for those of us who are not necessarily scientists, it's almost a mystic belief. You almost have to suspend your sensory logic in order to accept their interpretation of what's going on. And I think Stalker does that quite well.
Yeah, so that's actually leads quite nicely into the next thing that I wanted to talk about. So trust, I think, is a big theme. Trust belief is a big theme throughout the movie. I found it quite interesting. So if I looked at the Stalker, this is not a man that I would put massive amounts of faith or trust into. He doesn't seem to be all that well put together. Kind of, he seems like nervous. He doesn't seem that confident. And he talks about the dangers that the party face without explicitly describing what might happen. So he doesn't say specifically that these people might die. He just says something bad will happen. So we don't know if it's death or some other terrible thing that'll happen to them. So I was just wondering, what you kind of felt about, that idea of, putting your trust in someone in these sort of circumstances.
Right.
What the filmmaker was talking about there.
I really like that. It's true, and I think so. Again, I don't want to ruin the film by saying too much about the characters themselves, but I'll say this: that each of the three characters is going into the zone for their own reasons. Okay, and it comes clear at the end what those reasons are. But for the Stalker, he doesn't want to go to the room, despite the fact that the room is the place where your innermost desire becomes a reality. He doesn't want to go there. His impetus behind going into the zone and going towards the room is because he almost feels like an internal obligation to be the Stalker, to be the person that brings other people to the room. It's almost like he doesn't want to do it himself. He just feels he has to. And so you look at this man who, like you say, the Stalker is he's not a healthy looking person. He's not well dressed. He doesn't have the bearing or the attitude of a person you would want to trust in a life or death situation. And yet because he's compelled to take people to this room in the zone, you have to trust him because nobody else can get you there. It's just that idea that you have an internal motivation to do something, not because you want to do it yourself, but because you want to help other people achieve something. And it's very interesting. I thought a lot about the relationship that the three characters have with each other, and I'll say that, in my opinion, again, this is my opinion, I think that they are archetypes, right? So an archetype is something that is an archetype of a person. People can be kind of divided into different types, and so some of those types might be intellectual or explorer or soldier or et cetera, and explorer is a big one. And in fact, all three of these are explorers in a sense, right? So you have the philosophical or intellectual explorer is the professor. You have the artistic, the literary explorer being the writer. And then you have the Stalker, who on the surface of it is the explorer of the physical world, in the literal sense, the person who explores. Except he doesn't explore. He is not an explorer. He's the opposite of an explorer. There's all of this vast wilderness for him to be able to see, but he chooses a specific path through it that he deems as safe. He's not interested in seeing what's in that building or what's over here, what's there. He's only interested in taking the person from the edge of the zone to the room and back again. And that's it. Yeah, I don't know. That's it. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. You've got I've got a sense that you've got a far more virtuous view of what the Stalker's motivation is in going to the zone. I do. I mean, I've only seen the film once. My view of the Stalker was that he was almost it's almost like he's a drug addict, kind of like he needs to go to the zone to get his fix.
Yep.
Then kind of like after he, the sense of relief when he first gets there, he lies on the ground. It's, for me, kind of reminded me of imagery you see in films of someone taking that first, getting that hit of heroin after they've been kind of like they've been jonesing for a while. That's kind of the sense that I got from it. So I think his motivations are a little bit more selfish. I think kind of he would be there. Like, I don't think he'd be able to visit there without people kind of coming to give him the money for him to take him there. But it's kind of the altruistic aspect of what he's doing, if there's such a thing, is a byproduct of his desire to actually just be in the zone rather than
I think you're right.
his main motivation to be there.
I think you're right. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. He exhibits all of the behaviors of a person who is almost addicted, like you say. Like he the rest of his life is that boring sepia tone, and the only time he ever really feels alive is when he's in the zone. And I think you're right. That's probably a fair assessment.
Yeah. So one of the things I was a little bit worried about when I first started watching the movie, I thought that this was going to turn into one of those best of the worst classic sci-fi movies of men just walking around in a wood with not much happening, which it sort of is, but it kind of like isn't as well. Kind of obviously the cinematography and the dialogue is far better than any of the films that would be featured in best of the worst. No microphones are visible, I believe, anywhere in the film. But I was just, I kind of questioned whether it was a sci-fi movie. I'd actually say this is more of splitting hairs. I think it's more of a fantasy film than a sci-fi film. As I don't know why. I mean, there's kind of sci-fi elements in there, but it's just interesting. I found it interesting that people classified it as a sci-fi film when the only real sci-fi element to it is maybe its modern setting and the apparent kind of meteorite falling down, because we don't actually know if the meteorite fell down or if it might be a supernatural occurrence. So I don't know if you've got any kind of thoughts regarding that.
Yeah. So totally, I take where you're coming from. Let me say it like this. I think I'm a huge fan of the Soviet aesthetic when it comes to making movies, like Tarkovsky being an example, where if we take it in comparison to the American aesthetic of making a sci-fi movie, in American science fiction, it's filled with aliens in rubber costumes, face masks, and ships blowing up, and laser pistols, and all of these things. It's draped in the sort of post-edit, computer graphics and all of these types of things. And when if what you are used to in the world of science fiction is Star Wars or Star Trek or
2001, yeah,
sure, any of these large budget space dramas, then this Stalker will appear to you to not be science fiction. I'll say that to me, the reason why it is the epitome of science fiction is it uses science as a springboard towards examining the human condition. That to me is science fiction. That's what that is, and this is science fiction because it deals with the idea of like some kind of perhaps extraterrestrial event, which causes a massive change in the way people live their lives, and not only that, but it presents them with an opportunity to achieve something that would not normally ever be achievable. Granted, it's the only reason why we can think that it might be a meteor is there's a little bit of text at the beginning of the film that says, a meteor landed on the Earth. That's all we have to suggest that it's a meteor. You're right; it might be something else. But whatever it is, if you like, scientific in nature. It's not just simply a drama where two people might have a conflict with each other. It is something external. It's an external influence upon our lives that makes that change. But I take your point. I think so. The Soviets, to me, make wonderful pictures with this type of thing. Solaris is one of Tarkovsky's other famous films, and in Solaris, the main character visits a planet, which, in a similar kind of way, it's a planet that's also an organism, and that planet, in the similar kind of way to this, it gives you what you want. But it doesn't necessarily always give you what you think you want, only what you really want down deep. And so that one is a little bit more sort of space opera in the sense that he's on a spaceship and you can tell he's on a spaceship and there's a planet there and all of that. But this is, to me, it's like the perfect science fiction movie because the science doesn't get in the way of the movie. It's not about the rubber face masks of the aliens and all of those things. It's really about just the idea of science and how it changes people, the concepts that science introduces into our lives and how that changes people. So, but I take your point. It's not. This film is not for everybody. By the way, there are lots of people who don't like it, and I can understand why you wouldn't like this movie. But
I'm not too sure if I did like it or not. I'm thinking about it a lot, and I'm not too sure if I've got the energy to watch it again. It's I just felt anxious all the way. I don't want to say it was an unpleasant viewing, but I felt anxious all the way through. So it's just and one of the main things that actually made me feel anxious. So I downloaded it. Well, I didn't download it. I streamed it from a website called what was the website called? ukchili.com, and they've got a standard definition stream of the film. So I don't know if the sound editing on this. Some of it I think was a deliberate design. Some of it I'm not too sure if it was just down to the print that they were streaming. There was a lot of like ambient crackling sound that in a normal film that would be kind of like you try and take that out. So when the film's first opens up, I got a lot of
no.
So
okay,
I don't know.
No, that's not supposed to be there. I
Yeah.
watched the DVD of it, and the sound design's a lot of Foley. There's you can tell the whole film is definitely Foley. There's no in situ whatsoever. But it's the sound design that I thought was quite good. It lends a lot of etherealness to the movie, but I don't think there's meant to be any kind of sort of background hiss. So maybe that is the rip that you want.
Yeah. So I just maybe it was just the stream. I mean, the thing is, I paid 90p to watch it, so I was assuming that I was going to be getting a copy that had good sound on it. It was just I almost switched it off because it's like this is not like good sound editing. So it was, but the sound does play a big part in the movie as well. Kind of, people think of cinema as just as a visual medium, which it definitely is, but if the sound isn't great, it can really badly affect the experience that you have with a film. And as you mentioned, most of the films are entirely Foley, and that's the other thing that I kind of noticed sometimes when you do entirely Foley a film. Sometimes when you're doing the dialogue, it doesn't quite match up. Sometimes, so that's the experience I had with the film. So you say the Blu-ray or DVD film didn't have any of those same issues?
Not that I noticed. I mean, I watched the DVD, and it seemed to me I didn't at least notice any popping or hissing. You may have have watched a rip of a 35mm version of it that might be old, and sometimes the audio track
maybe
don't get scratched, and you get a lot more sort of hissing and things like that. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, it was a bit odd because when the dialogue or the music came in, it was absolutely fun. It was just during this film's got long moments of silence when that kind of sound kind of came in. So I don't know if it was supposed to be silent or whether like the filmmaker made the choice of having a sound in there. So yeah, so that's that was another reason why I needed to kind of watch it in like free kind of batches, because like the sound was just getting on my nerves a lot. It was just like really, really annoying.
It's also 3 hours long. I mean, that's a pretty long movie. It's
yeah. So I mean, I've got, as I've gotten older, if a movie's over 3 hour long, it better be a bloody good reason for it. Most stories, most films, I think, like if 90 minutes is more than enough, really, for a lot of films. That's why I haven't gone to the cinema to see most of the new Marvel superhero films, because it's like 2.5 hours long. I was like, come on, bro, man, it's not really long. Do you know what I mean? It's not really long to make a film longer. I think with Stalker, the experience wouldn't be the same if you had cut down some of those shots. One of my favorite shots in the film is when they're crawling through the tunnel and those sand dunes appear, and I was just like, oh, what's going on there, man? It's just a very beautiful, stark shot, and one of the it's one of the sequences in the film where you actually get a firm sense that there is something dangerous that might befall the before our party.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I love this the set design and the photography in this film so much. The way I describe it is that the whole film makes me feel like I'm watching a dream, like one of my dreams, and it's not a dream, like not a sleeping dream, not something that I will have experienced while I was asleep, but almost like a daydream, or I like to say it like a genetic dream, like a dream of that is embedded in me, as opposed to something I will have actually experienced at some point. And there's certain scenes in it that really make me feel like that, like the one exactly you mentioned where they finish crawling through the tunnel and they enter in that room that has all these little sand dunes. There's something so primal about it. It, like you say, it makes you feel like, much like a dream. Sometimes you can have an anxiety dream, like a dream where if you were just experiencing it normally, you would not feel anxiety, but because it's a dream and because there's something in it that makes you feel anxious, you really do. And this film really does that in a very, very good way. It's like experiencing your own anxiety dream that you've never actually really experienced before.
So I mean, if there's one criticism one of the criticisms I do have of the movie was that in regard to the dangers that the party face, I did feel sometimes it was a little bit more tell than show. I would have liked them to show the potential dangers a little bit more. I think there's only one sequence in the movie where they show the skeletal remains of two other venturers into the zone, and they're in an embrace. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that. We have to take a lot of faith, not only the potential value of the room, but the actual potential dangers of the zone as well. We know there's kind of they've got this sequence at the start of the movie where they have to kind of get past this barracks of soldiers. But aside from that, once you're actually into the zone, it's kind of what are the dangers there? I would have liked to that have been shown a little bit more by the filmmakers, but I don't know what you think about
that. I hear what you're saying. I don't think that the film is about the zone at all. I don't think the film is about danger is not danger in a literal immediate sense, not danger in the like somebody walking up to you and punching you in the nose sense. It's about the anxiety of being human and everything that goes along with that. So all of the self-doubt and the self-hatred and anxiety and all of these things. That's really what the film is about. And if they introduced something that was like a really immediate danger, it would take you out of that. It would remind you that the outside world is dangerous, when this movie is not about that. It's about the inside world being dangerous. It's about the horrible things we do to ourselves. And And so for that reason, the only time you ever really experience anything that hints at danger, like you say, there's one tiny little bit where there's two sort of skeletonized bodies in an embrace that in this little corridor you see. There are the rusted out tanks in a field that you see, so there was clearly a battle at some point. And right near the end, they kind of have a bit of a fist fight, right? And I won't say why.
Yeah, I think it's
I won't say why because
generous to call it a fist fight, but yeah.
Yes, but there is a fist fight in the sense that, and
Yeah.
they're fighting over something that's very dangerous, and in each of these circumstances, it's only a sort of hint of danger. I think that the real what the filmmaker, what Tarkovsky is trying to communicate in this instance is that the real dangers in life come from yourself. You know, in America, Americans are very famous. I'm not American, by the way. I thought I'd mention that, but in America, there's one of their sort of one of the defining features of being American is the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. You know, every American, not every American, many Americans take it very seriously that they should be able to own weapons, right? And but what they don't say is, and of course, there's lots of statistics about people dying from gunshot wounds and all of that. But what they don't mention is that far and away, the leading killer from guns is suicide, way more than the homicide. Way more than almost all of the other types of death by weapon, by firearm combined. It's suicide. And so this gun has the firearm, the pistol has this sort of reverence in American society. And what they don't realize is when a person walks into a shop to buy a gun, they're far more likely to use that gun on themselves than they ever are to use it on another human being. And so in this instance, the gun is not the dangerous thing. It's the person who's purchasing the gun. They are the internal struggle that person experiences. That is the danger. And I think this film as well, if it had more overt signs of danger, of violence, it would take away from, in my opinion, where the real struggle lies. But I take your point. I think it's an interesting place to discuss it for sure.
Yeah. So there's just a couple of other things I want to discuss before I let you go. I felt that the dialogue in this film was really, really good. All the character. So this is very much a character piece. It's not action driven. It's not really plot driven. And I just wanted to sort of, pick your brains a little bit about, you mentioned that each of the characters are kind of, following an archetype, and there's a lot of discussions between the professor and the writer about kind of what is the nature of each one of their truths, and I just wanted to kind of get your take on that in terms of the dialogue between the professor and the writer about the value of each one of their works and kind of their take on what the truth is.
Yeah, and remember, we have to frame all of this discussion in Soviet Russia, right? So for us, a scientific professor and a writer means something very different. But to the 1979 Soviet person who is going to be watching this movie, and that is who this movie is made for as well. Tarkovsky made his films in the Soviet Union for Soviet audiences, and it should be pointed out that the state hated this movie when it came out. He argued along with them about whether or not it should even be released. And I just also like to say one thing before we leave this discussion on this picture is that, and I think it's as integral to the picture itself, is that this movie was actually made twice. And the one we're watching is the second one. They shot the entire movie, shot for shot, in exactly what we have seen in this movie, you and I just now. They shot the entire thing in all the locations with the dialogue, same actors. And they took the film to be processed and discovered that the person who was handling it had basically messed up the timing on the celluloid, and the entire thing was unusable. 100% of the movie was unusable. And Tarkovsky had already spent all of the money on the film to film it the first time, and he had to go back to the state and say, look, we've had a problem. And he and his entire production team and the actors had to shoot the whole film again a second time, from beginning to end. And what we are seeing in the second movie, it's a crazy story. Like, how much time and effort and money goes into making a film. So imagine, like, they go out and shoot the next Avengers movie and then get back to the studio after shooting the entire thing ready for post-processing and discover that they've overwritten all of the drives, the hard drives in which it's stored. Like, that would be kind of the same sort of thing. So, bearing all that in mind, and how this pictures, now we are watching it in the 21st century, I think we need to remember that the characters here are not driven by any kind of desire that, like, you and I would. You and I are driven by desires, a number of things, but we're driven to succeed of course, in what we want to do. But part of that is also to make enough money to survive. Part of it is, we want to be accepted by our communities. All of these types of things, all of these drive us. They are our personal truths. In the Soviet Union, it's a little bit different. And I don't claim to be an expert on this, so please don't take it like I'm speaking from a place of authority here. But the Soviet Union, it's much more about your place in the state. The state exists, and every position in your country is in some way informed by the state. You cannot exist in a place that is outside of the state's influence. It doesn't exist. So you have the professor who has colleagues and who has a place in his university where he teaches, but that is, again, all funded by the state. And then you have the writer, and the writer is, I think, maybe you could say, is a proxy for the filmmaker. Everything he delivers as a writer must be approved by the state before it's published. There's no opportunity for him to write a book or a poem that is not then reviewed by a censor board and then delivered to the public. Finally, you have the Stalker, who exists as much as any of them outside of the state. He is, it's clear he spent time in prison before now. He does what he does, but he is not welcomed by the state whatsoever. So each of these three individuals has a level of interaction with each other that would and could only really be understood by somebody who lives in the 1970s in the Soviet Union. For the rest of us, we have to interpret what their desires are. And I think you hit the nail on the head, and it's for truth. Each of them is looking for truth. They don't really know what they are looking to find, but they are looking for it. And if I can say, so the one place in which I'll ruin the movie, but I think it's integral to understanding the film, is there's a character in the movie that is never seen, but is talked about by the characters there. And his name is Porcupine. And this character, Porcupine, has been to the zone before these guys, and in fact was a stalker before this stalker. And he he's referred to by the three of them, and it's clear that he committed suicide before all of this is taking place in the film. And there is by the end of the film, it is clearly said why he committed suicide, and it's because he, as a stalker, took a lot of people to this room, and then eventually his brother died, and he went to the room himself. Porcupine decided he was going to go himself, and he went there. And with the idea that his wish, his ultimate wish that the room was going to deliver to him, was for him to be able to get his brother back. But when he goes to the room and he visits the room and leaves, what happens to him is he wins a bunch of money. And he can no longer deal with the fact that when his own opinion of himself changes, he thought his innermost wish was for his brother to be returned to life. But when it came down to it, he experienced the room, and the room gave him his innermost desire, and that desire was to be rich, not for his brother to be alive. And he couldn't deal with that. He couldn't process the fact that his innermost desire was something so banal, something so pedestrian. and so he took his own life. So the other three characters that we actually see in this movie, they're all looking for their own truths. And by the end of the movie, they have, through their discussions with each other in this kind of very archetypal way, the writer talks about writing and the professor talks about physics, but then they also talk about each other's disciplines. So the writer talks about physics and the physics professor talks about writing, and they talk across each other, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about what each other does. And by the end of the movie, they are questioning their own ability to exercise decisions in their areas. And so by the end, the writer and the professor are sitting in front of that room, and you can see the doubt in their face. They're not sure that they even want to enter the room anymore because they really don't know what they're going to find. So it's not important that we talk about these people in terms of people, individuals, because I don't think they are people. They are archetypes. What does a writer really want? What does a professor really want? We don't know. But as an individual, maybe you don't even know either. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's fundamentally what the movie is about. It's about an examination of a person's innermost desire, and how sometimes that's the most frightening thing available to you. And if you were to actually realize your innermost desire, it would be horror, pure horror to you.
Yeah, that's really well put. So we've been going for about an hour, so let's begin to wrap up. So I think it's not my opinion on Stalker. I think it's definitely a worthwhile film going into to watch it. So if you do get the opportunity to watch it, please do. I might not recommend UK Chili's version of it because it does sound like I might have streamed a duff version with some sound issues to it, but it's definitely a film that you should try to watch if you can. I'm not too sure if I can say it was enjoyable, but it's definitely one that makes you think. So we're recording this Monday, 13th of April, 2020. For those of you listeners listening back to this, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Geoff, how are you coping with self-isolation and all that jam? I'm missing jiu-jitsu like mad. I was just wondering how you're coping with all that good stuff. Or bad stuff.
It's tough. So I've been, the way I've coped with it is right at the beginning, because as you know, Fred, I teach BJJ pretty much full time now, or at least I did before the pandemic. It was my source of income, but it was what kept me busy. And so you run one of my sister clubs in North London, and we kind of got ahead of the curve a little bit, and we canceled all of our classes even before the government said you had to close all the gyms. We were even like a week before that. So we have been without our outlet for like 6 weeks now, 7 weeks.
Oh, God, has it been that long? Yes, yeah.
I think so. And so, and that's a long time. So right at the very beginning, it meant because I had nothing to do, I decided I was going to try and fill my days with something at least relatively productive. And so I started volunteering at the Hackney Food Bank. And I've been working there pretty much full time since. And I'm really glad that I did that, not only because it gives me something to do, but because it gave me a window into the fact that I'm now aware that people are actually really generous. We tend to focus on the bad people, the politicians and all of that, the people that we dislike a lot. We focus on them, but they're actually a relatively small percentage of the population. The vast majority of people are very generous, not only with their time, but with their money. I can say that having worked at the food bank, we get people every single day coming in and saying, here, I'm going to donate this. I don't have a lot, but I'll donate what I can, and I just wish I could do more. And that goes right across all age groups, denominations, people of all different kinds of backgrounds, So that's kind of what I've taken from it. It's buoyed me quite a bit. It makes me feel quite good about the future.
That's great. And are there any books or films or albums you think people should check out while we're in this period of self-isolation?
Yeah, you know, one of my favorite albums that I listen to when I need something maybe to meditate to, or just to help me kind of feel a little bit less anxious about things, is Eric Satie. He's a composer. He was a composer, and he wrote a suite of sort of modern classical music. And I'll give you the full. It's Gymnopédie, so Gymnopedies, and Gnossienne, Gnossinnes. If you just type in Eric Satie, Eriksatie, you'll get this album. It's about an hour long. All of his work is really good, but this in particular has a quality of allowing you to relax that I've never really felt with another composition. And it's just really, I just really love it. Eric Satie.
Okay. That's great, dude. So we'll wrap up here. One thing you want to say, guys, stay the fuck at home. That's it. I'm probably going to be recording another 2 episodes about films, and then I'll kind of want the next season to be on something else, and I'm probably going to be looking at Talleyrand again and try and do 3 or 4 episodes about him. Okay, guys, that's it. Thanks, Geoff.
Thanks a lot, Fad.